Tonight, as always, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our dear friend, Herb Kagan. He has carefully and thoughtfully walked us through a thorough look at the first 6 steps. Tonight, Herb is going to begin speaking about step 7. And wait till you hear the title of it, The Removal of Darkness. That holds great promise for me. I think it will for you too. Herb, take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Susie. My name is Herb, and I'm an alcoholic, and I'm honored to be here again. And I do think that some place between 30 and 45 minutes, we'll have this discussion. Step 7 is really a very short step in the big book. If you're familiar with the big books, page 76, it's the second paragraph, and the entire paragraph is dominated by the prayer itself. That's it. The prayer is there, and the obvious assumption is pray the prayer. So we'll warm it up a little bit with kind of a recap of steps 6 and my experience with steps 6 and 7 combined. I gave you a hint of mint in the prior discussion about step 6, because I can't really discuss the step 6 without a bit touching on step 7 from my personal experience. They're very different steps. Step 6 is naming character defects. Step 7 is removing character defects. Now, Bill uses 2 different words. Defects of character, I believe, in step 6, and shortcomings in step 7. I've heard brilliant discussions, read brilliant discussions, or even debates about the difference between defects of character and shortcomings. Interesting. Some of it not so much, but most of it actually well-intentioned and interesting. And then I heard a tape from Bill Wilson being interviewed. And one of the interviewees said, interviewers, sorry. He said, in step 6 and 7, you use different words, defects of character and shortcomings. What's the difference? And Bill laughed. It was a gentle laugh of recognition. And he said, in basic English, I was taught never to use the same word in consecutive sentences. They're the same. Well, for me, that ended the discussion, the debate. The author himself said, they're the same word, they're just synonyms and that's why, and thank you, Susie, for confirming the title that we discussed and used for this session, Darkness. See, this is a walk into and toward the light. I'm using this in the last year or two as a metaphor for this journey, to try to give us a sense of traction, making it more concrete. Well, what are we doing here? I mean, we blah, 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 blah. We hear about the book and the steps and lots of conversation. And quite frankly, we go brain dead because we've heard many of the words and phrases before. It's kind of like, oh, yeah. But see, this group starts with that set-aside prayer. It's a prayer for intervention, spiritual intervention. It's not a prayer to give me the strength to set aside and open my heart and open my mind. No, I've done the best I can. It's really just not been good enough because I'm suffering intolerably. That's why I'm here. And so I need help, not human help. I don't know what there is other than human help. This is step 1, a complete implosion. Powerless. Again, brain dead to that word. How about no choice? That's really the bottom line of step 1. No choice. My life is filled with darkness, addiction, until it's not. I can't change the addiction on my own power, but I can hope and work for some relief, mysteriously by a power other than myself. I don't have to know what it is. I just have to believe that it is. And at some point, we become free, given the gift of grace, at least by the end of the 9th step. And if you don't believe me, look at page 84 in the big book. I mean, it couldn't be any clearer. We are placed in a position of neutrality. I'm quoting. We are placed, a grace, in a position of neutrality, freedom from our addiction. But then very quickly, Bill says on the same page, we're not cured. He doesn't tell us of what. But if you read it in the context, especially in the context of the first 84 pages, we're not cured of unmanageability. This is the best kept secret in the rooms. What is unmanageability? I'm not going into that. I did that in step 1, 2 sessions in January, unpacked it very deeply. But if you want a Reader's Digest version, page 52 is a behavioral description of unmanageability, those bedevilments. Pages 60 to 62 is a description of the exact nature of the source of the bedevilments, selfishness and self-centeredness. And he says, we're not cured, we have a daily reprieve. That's after we finish the 9th step, of course, when we enter the world of the spirit. After the 9th step, pages 84 and 85, those 2 pages are so dense. I'll unpack them in October. But for now, we enter the world of the spirit. Steps 1 through 9 is the world of self. That's the whole point of step 2 and 3. Step 2 is a choice. That there is a power. Page 53, God is or God isn't. What is your choice? Step 3 is a decision. Look at that. Herb just used 2 different words. One for step 2, choice. One for step 3, decision. Again, they're synonyms in meaning that they're the use of my free will, an ability, a free, voluntary ability to make a decision and take some action. In step 2, it's a choice with no action. That's why I use the word choice. Very subtle, but in step 3, I use the word decision because it's in the step itself, a decision to turn from my self-centeredness to other-centeredness, and it's a commitment to turn, which the mechanism is steps 4 through 9. In step 3, I make a commitment through a choice to take action. Therefore, I call that a decision. It's a decision to action. It's a decision to have a relationship with power and then to do and complete steps 4 through 9. Step 4 names the obstacles in us to that relationship with the light. In step 2, Bill uses this fabulous phrase, sunlight of the spirit, underlying the totality of things. So we're walking in the sunlight, actually energized by the sunlight to, in fact, live in the sunlight. And step 4, well, what are the clouds in us? Staying with the metaphor. What are the clouds in us that block us from the sunlight? The sunlight is deep down inside of us. What's the problem? Oh, resentment and fear and dishonesty and selfishness and secrets and shame and guilt. The things that we unpack and by naming in step 4 and begin to remove in step 5. And then step 6 again is an inventory. Step 4 is an inventory. of our grosser handicaps, he says on page 71. Step 6 is another inventory. What's the difference? Step 4 is about the source of the shadows. Step 6 is, how do the shadows manifest in our inclinations? Bill uses the term in the 12 and 12, instincts gone awry. Our inclinations, our instincts, fight, flight, and freeze. These are behavioral, these are biological instincts in us for survival. Nothing wrong with them except how they manifest. Instincts gone awry, meaning we addicts don't go through the normal form of maturation to adulthood. He signals that in step 6 in the 12 and 12. He said this step 6 brings us from the boy to the man. In today's language, we would use the child to the adult. And in the language of the last 40 years, we would talk about the rite of passage. The rite of passage from the child to the adult, meaning consciously taking responsibility for our actions. And in step 6, these are the inclinations and the behaviors that come from the inclinations as instincts gone awry. The source, self-centeredness, the filter, fight, flight, and freeze, resentment, fear, and dishonesty as the emotional reactions going to our feet and our behavior, which we do inventory on in step 8. So kind of an interesting unpacking of the 12-step dynamic process when we take a look at us as human beings. The model I use is I'm a human being because I have a cortex and a neocortex. That third brain that developed millions of years ago, after millions of years of reptilian behavior with the brainstem, and then millions of years of mammalian behavior in the limbic system that created our ability to have emotions, but no consciousness. And then the cortex and the neocortex that gave us the ability to have thought and to have free will. Those are the two things that make us human, that I have a mind that thinks reflectively and a free will that chooses selectively. And now here's the dynamic. Each of the steps are uniquely addressing one aspect of our humanity. All of the even steps are mind-knowing steps. Take a look at it. All of the odd steps are decision and action steps. The steps are built uniquely for us as human beings, to know and then to do. It's amazing. But it really helps me understand then step 6. It's a knowing step. It's an inventory step. Again, we're looking for the underlying source and the inclinations and the sources of our instincts gone awry. Fight, flight, and freeze again. Although I probably had 40 character defects as I saw them, but as I distilled them down, I'm fairly analytical in my process in 1988, going through this for the very first time. I was 4 years sober. I took the 40 down to 10 because I saw that impatience is merely a kissing cousin of anger. And procrastination is a kissing cousin of fear. And dishonesty comes under the mantle of shame and hiding and freeze in terms of the survival instincts. It helped me explain how these things manifest and what my primary reaction was. Mine happens to be hiding, freeze, dishonesty. A chameleon. I will fit in. I will fit in to survive. There are other people whose primary survival instinct is anger, fight. And there's others whose primary survival instinct is flight, running, fear. Each of us have all of them, of course, because we're human beings. But each of us, for either maybe genetic or perhaps cultural conditioning, we have a dominant one. That helped me a lot to understand my reaction. I did not know that shame was a feeling. So let's actually bring in the slides and see what will help there. A lot of the material that I talk about is on my website, so you're welcome to go to that. These are the items of bondage. The bondage of addiction and the bondage of unmanageability. I'm more interested and focused on the second half of the first step, the bondage of unmanageability. That was the context of the majority of the conversation I was giving. Those first three steps, as I mentioned, Bill talks about rocketed into the fourth dimension. It's a wonderful model. If you play it out in your mind, we get into the rocket. That's our job. Our willingness to get on board the rocket because we need to be delivered. That's a word that Bill used. He was delivered to a spiritual awakening. He was delivered to freedom. We need to get into the rocket ship. That's our role, our willingness to take some initial action. But even that's a grace, a mystery for a conversation for another day. And the rocket will take us where it's going. That work that I've been talking about now, warming us up to getting to the sixth step. That fourth step, inventory. The exact nature of our wrongs. That fifth step, revealing it transparently. The sixth step, naming it again. And the seventh step, removing. I mentioned the cultural and the genetics. You've seen this if you've been watching me before, but if you haven't, these are the Russian dolls called matrushka. In Russian, that means mother. And this is our story. Our story. Each one of us has a unique story. Obviously, it starts with our being born as genetics. We have no control over that. You might notice I'm a white male, bald. I know at least 3 generations of men in my family, my father, my grandfather, and his father. They were all white, male, bald. They were also alcoholic. You see, this is genetics. But then each of us was raised differently. My great-grandfather in Scotland, my grandfather in Nova Scotia, Canada, my father in Vancouver, Canada, and then in Los Angeles when we moved here. Each one of those cultures made a difference in the way I was raised. I had emotional experiences from the schools and from the family and from my friends. And then I got an education all the way through postgraduate work. All of that formed and deformed me. And then there's the true self. What does that mean? I didn't even know about it until I began to know about it. Thanks to the 12-step program and thanks to my exposure to psychology in the graduate work and then my therapy with Dr. Berger, actually. Well, I skipped one, didn't I? Well, all it said was steps 4, 5, 6, and 7 are to remove these clouds in us. I don't have the capability of going backwards with any ease right now. I'm not at home. And so we looked at step 6, to be specific, as I was talking about. And the step 6, as we emphasized last time, was about willingness. It's only one paragraph on page 76. It doesn't say name them. It doesn't say make a list. It doesn't say inventory. But I believe that's the implication. At least it was my inclination to write out a list of the character defects that I had seen in my 4th and 5th step. And the logic is, if I'm going to be willing to have them removed, which is the tone of that paragraph, I really need to be specifically aware of what they are. And so I looked at them, as I said, and I made that list, and I distilled it down into those categories of 10 families. And then I thought that was such a wonderful process. I distilled it down into these, I saw it immediately, intuitively, categories that Bill uses in the 4th step: resentment and fear and dishonesty as expressed in my sexual behavior. And the absolute root of all of that, Bill says on page 62, is our selfishness, self-centeredness. It's the root. And the fruit is anger expressed in resentment, fear expressed in fear and anxiety, our sexual behavior under the overarching mantle of dishonesty, at least in my case. Am I willing to have them removed? Well, I can see that all of these character defects, I honestly always wanted to be a decent human being. I didn't know that I didn't know until I did this inventory that I wasn't. I mean, I'm 4 years sober, 1988, 4 years sober, 48 years old. And I think that I'm a Renaissance man because of my background. I studied to be a Catholic priest. I was a monk for 7 years. That left me the impression that I was special and unique and quite advanced in my consciousness and development. I really did believe, seriously, 4 years sober, that I was a Renaissance man. Well, when I did this work beginning in February of 1988, going through that 4th and 5th step, I was shocked. I wasn't a Renaissance man, I was a Neanderthal. You've heard my details of some of that in the 4th step and the 5th step discussions earlier. So are we entirely ready to have God remove? I mean, that's what the book says. Is there a power? Is that power available to me? Is that power not only capable, but willing to remove these clouds blocking the sunlight? These are huge questions if we're conscious of this process. It's very intangible, it's very invisible. It does depend on our 2nd and 3rd step experience. And quite frankly, I didn't have any in 1988. I blew by steps 2 and 3 because of my background. It wasn't until I was 10 years sober, 1994, that I went through this work again and had a unique experience with steps 2 and 3 and found out that all of my concepts up till that point, all of my concepts about spirituality and God up till that point were the very impediments to my relationship with the mystery. It's a story for a different day. But I had a sufficient willingness here, and a sufficient concept, even though it was ineffective by my standards today. At that time, it was the best I could do, and it was good enough. I hope you're hearing that. Whatever you bring to this process right now is good enough. Whatever you do right now is good enough. Existentially, that's a very fancy word by meaning like right now. The truth is, it's a good enough, even though you might think it's not, even though it might be inconsistent and lacking in diligence and lacking even in willingness. It's the best you can do. Even though it's not the best you can do, it is the best you can do. Please hear that. Just show up, breathe in and breathe out, move forward. We have this initial impression that this is a step process where we walk up the steps to the light. Yes, it's true. And yet my experience is it's not a linear staircase, it's a spiral staircase. And we go around it, as one of the authors said, we meet ourselves for the first time. Each time. Step 7, I have mentioned about the shortcomings and the deficient and the character defects. The same word. Do I accept that I am powerless over my inclinations? Do I accept that I am responsible for my behavior? Now that's a distinction, a very subtle distinction at first. It might seem subtle. It's not subtle after you have the experience that I'm about to talk about. So I had this list, I've checked it twice. I'm certainly naughty and not nice. And I don't want any of my character defects. By definition, they're defects. There's nothing in terms of an asset about any of my liabilities. I have lots of sponsees who think that their defects are somewhat their assets because it helped them become whatever they become. And here they are talking to me about their powerlessness and their crappy lives. And so I point out the obvious. These are not assets, they're obviously liabilities. By definition, Dr. Berker calls them our default reflexes, our unhealthy coping strategies. Wonderful psychological terms to explain our attempts at being safe and surviving. So I prayed the prayer, the 7-step prayer. The man had me write out my own 7-step prayer. If you haven't done that for the 3rd step, if you haven't done that for the 7th step, please do it. Write out your own based on the words in page 63 in step 3 and page 76 for step 7. Write out your own prayer based on the words and phrases in those prayers. Not to improve it, but to understand it. When you have to put it in your own words, you have to understand the words in the book. And it will make the words in the book much more conscious and much more powerful. And I did that. And I prayed both of them, the one in the book and my own private prayer. And the next day I woke up and I was very disappointed. The character defect that was ruining my professional life. I had started an affair with a woman at work. If I had been discovered, I would have been fired. If my wife had become aware of it, it would ruin my personal life. She would have divorced me. And the big book promises on page 71, if I continue that behavior, that I'm going to get drunk. It's going to undermine my program. My step guide was very clear in pointing all of this out to me. I didn't come up with that conclusion all on my own. But he was objective sounding board and told me the truth. He wasn't concerned about my feelings. So there was nothing about that character defect of infidelity that I wanted to hold on to. And the next day I was very disappointed because I still had the character defect, and I called her and etc. And so I went to my step meeting. And in that meeting that week, a crosstalk meeting, a men's stag meeting, where we hold each other accountable for the step work. That's the total point of the meeting. One man shared that he prayed specifically for the removal of a specific character defect. Well, it's not in the big book, and it's not in the 12 and 12, but it was his specific experience. And he said it was removed when he prayed specifically for the removal of a specific character defect. I thought, wow, that's interesting. And I thought about it for a couple of days. You don't want to rush into anything like that. So on Saturday, the meeting was on Thursday. On Saturday, I went into my bedroom, fully willing to get on my knees and pray the prayer specifically. This man who took me through the steps said very clearly, we don't get on our knees to get God's attention. We get on our knees to get our attention. He was the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, a very proud and bright and arrogant man. He got on his knees, he said, for subordination, an act of humility, an act of submission, to get his own attention. So I got on my knees. And I was about to pray the prayer specifically for the removal of this specific character defect, and I had to stop. I was completely aware at that point that I was unwilling. It shocked me. I had spent months on a fourth step, 10 hours on a fifth step, a whole weekend on the preparation of 6 and 7. I was shocked. I was unwilling, but I remembered there as I'm reflecting on step 6 and 7, on my knees, unwilling, that step 6 says willingness to be willing. Pray for the willingness if you're not willing. And I took a deep breath and I said, I'm willing to be willing to be willing. It was remote, but I knew my life depended on it. Page 71. I will drink again, and if I drink, I'll die. Plus, my whole life would explode and implode. So I prayed the prayer specifically for the removal of the specific character defect of infidelity. And I called the man who was guiding me through the steps. And I related to him what I just related to you. And he said, oh, Herb, what a wonderful insight. Now stop calling her. And he gave me a new insight right there. I got it. Oh, I'm responsible. Excuse me. I'm not responsible for my inclination. I'm powerless over that. But I am responsible for the behavior. I got it immediately. I repeated to him. We had a discussion about it. The difference between my inclination and my behavior. The inclination is the character defect. The behavior is the manifestation of the defect. He says, here's how it's going to work. You're going to pray every day because you're powerless over the inclination. But you're going to call me every day and tell me how you're doing because you're responsible for your behavior. And you can change your behavior with the help of God, of course. Wow. Within 48 hours, the behavior stopped and has never returned, 1989. It has never returned. The behavior. I continued to pray on a daily basis for the removal of the inclination. And I called him every day for a while, and then once a week for a while. And then as I was able to be stable in that area, I called him once a month, praying daily, but reporting accountability periodically. And it took 2 years, and the inclination went away and has never returned. The whole point of this story is step 6 and 7 are powerful, as short as they are. They're powerful, life-changing step process, but it's a process of prayer because I'm powerless, and accountability because I'm human. Are you willing to change? Do you believe in the power that's available to you that's deep inside of you? Take a look at Appendix 2. Unsuspected, inner resource, unsuspected, inner resource, a power that is available to me deep down inside of me that isn't me, that I can establish a relationship with. Step 3. Are you willing to pray sincerely? Or at least willing to be sincere, even if you're not sincere, for specific change. It's not in the book, big book, or the 12 and 12, but it happens to be my absolute experience. 1988, 1989, I was given freedom. But I think the real key here was accountability. Prayer is important. God's important, absolutely. But I'm a human being, and I needed to be accountable for the specific change of behavior. Because when I'm telling somebody else about it, maybe it's pride, maybe it's a human development, maybe it's psychology. I don't care actually what it is, but I know it's effective. And I found freedom. Freedom that's long lasting. A freedom from not only the behavior, but from the inclination to the behavior. How free do you want to be? That's really the question. How free do you want to be? This is the prayer from the big book. I'm not going to pray it today because we'll take care of all of that in the time that we're together with different prayers. As I said before, I believe my website will have much material that is a resource, all downloadable. I also have a YouTube playlist, several of them, that will help you navigate the step process with broader and deeper unpacking of each of the steps. All right.